Chapter 4 Fish Camp. Yuki huddled cold and wet in the tiny cave, listening to the crashing waves. A little shaft of dim light somehow managed to poke through the tiny hole through which he had crawled. His family back at camp would be eating now. They wouldn't be worried about him, for he often went exploring for long periods of time. Yuki couldn't drive the fearful image of Rabat, the shaman, from his mind. I'll bet this is part of Rabat's curse, he thought. The spirits are out to get me as well as Puni and the rest of the family. The idea frightened him as much as the situation he was in. I think grandfather believes in the creator God instead of the spirits of the shaman. I wonder what would happen if I talked to Campbell's creator God. Yuki greatly respected the wisdom of his grandfather. As he sat shivering in the semi-darkness, words began to form in his mind. Creator God, I don't know if you're around here somewhere, but if you are, I'm in trouble. Could you send someone to help me? Immediately, he felt guilty for even thinking such thoughts. The words still lingered in his mind when he heard a distant howling. The sound seemed to come close, then faded away. Yuki recognized that howl. Nansen! How did he get here? He must have broken loose and chased us down the island shore. Putting two fingers in his mouth, Yuki let out a shrill whistle that Nansen would know. Instantly the howls turned into wild barking that grew nearer and nearer. Nansen! Nansen! He shouted. As he looked up the roof of the cave, he realized he must be near the top of the cliff. Then he yelled again. He could hear his dog almost overhead. Picking up a sharp rock, he banged at the cave ceiling above his head. Nansen began frantically scratching and digging in the soft tundra. As small pieces of rock and dirt shook loose and rained on Yuki's head, he ducked to let the debris fall to the cave floor. Soon he saw a small hole above and Nansen's nose sticking through, sniffing and whining. Come on, Nansen. Good boy. Keep on digging, he called to his dog. Yuki tore at the opening, finally enlarging it enough so he could wedge his way through it. Wriggling and squirming, he rolled out onto the ground, gulping large breaths of fresh air. Nansen jumped on him and licked his face. Yuki grabbed him and hugged him until the dog let out a breathless woof and scrambled away. It was too late in the day when a subdued Yuki arrived back at camp. Grandfather, never one to use needless words, grunted a greeting. Yuki headed for a nearby stream to clean his dirty clothes. After a meal of fresh raw salmon, Yuki relaxed with the family in the shelter around a small fire. Finally, in a low, halting voice, Yuki confessed to his grandfather what had happened. Father didn't say anything, but sat quietly listening, probably remembering how he had done something similar when he was a boy. Yuki didn't mention anything about his talking with the Creator God. He was feeling confused, and he wanted to think about it for a while. The wind howled for 3 days as the family huddled in their camp at Kukulik. On the fourth day, Yuki awoke early. Finally, the strong winds had died down, and already the angry waves were smoothing out into rollers. Father and grandfather loaded the boats, and the family started out again for the fish camp. Yuki, Pony, and the two women sat in the middle of the boat, while father and grandfather intently scanned the waves breaking on the shore, watching for just the right wave. Then, with a mighty shove, the two men launched the boat, and everyone put all of their strength into paddling out beyond the breaking waves. Grandfather raised the sail, and they raced south ahead of the brisk breeze. Yuki and Puni shouted with glee as the little craft crested at the top of each wave and then slid down the other. Nansen barked and howled and raced along the shore. At fish camp, everyone worked to set up their temporary home, then settled in for a happy time of fishing. The streams were teeming with salmon, pushing their way up river to spawn. Yuki, his father, and his grandfather spent hours spearing the salmon and throwing them up on the bank. The women cleaned the fish and laid them out on the big racks to dry for the long winter ahead. Puni sat on the beach with her splendid leg stretched out in front of her. She helped by cleaning wild berries, thus forgetting the pain and the events of her fall. Yuki thought often of his prayer to the Creator God as he mulled over his experience in the cave. Was it really the Creator God who had sent Nansen in answer to his prayer, or was it just a coincidence? The busy activities at the camp made the month pass quickly. On the way home, the family stopped again at Kukulik, where they spent several days digging in the mounds of the ancient village, searching for artifacts. Each object they found taught a lesson in the traditional ways of their ancestors. At night, father and grandfather sat by the fire telling stories and reliving the days of their childhood. Yuki loved to listen to their stories of long ago. One evening, as they sat around the fire relaxing, grandfather told them of the villages on the island where he was raised. Many years ago, there were more than 15,000 of our people living on the islands in different villages. They lived in harmony for many generations. Kind and hospitable, they welcomed all who came to the island to visit, he said. Grandfather paused, staring at the dying embers of the fire, a sad expression on his face. He continued, but strange men came in large whaling boats, and they brought two deadly things to our people. One a territory, was a terrible sickness called the flu, and the other a dreadful drink called firewater. The firewater brought sickness to the minds of the adults, so they spent all summer under the influence of its evil spirit. They never prepared for the winter, and when the long winter nights came, they had no food to feed the children. Grandfather stopped and shook his head slowly, hurting from the reminder of the tragedy that had harmed his people. He looked up and said, the children in the villages were soon weak from hunger, and they got sick very easily and died. Now we have about 500 people on our island in two villages. These places we dig for artifacts are many hundreds, maybe even thousands of years old. They are the villages of our ancestors. Yuki and his family sat quietly for a long time, thinking about the story grandfather had told. The next day, when the sun was high in the sky, Yuki knelt by one of the mounds and dug with a stick in the soft tundra, looking for something that had once belonged to those who lived a long time ago. Each day the family scraped away a few inches of dirt down to the frozen ground called permafrost. During the day, the sun thawed a few more inches of ground, making it possible to dig some more. Yuki still hadn't told anyone about his talk with the Creator God, but as he dug, he revealed the incident. Suddenly his stick hit something solid. Carefully, he dug around it with his hands. Cleaning off the soil, he held it up in the sunlight to get a better look. It was a piece of old ivory in the shape of the letter T, each of the cross pieces about 4 inches in length. Examining it carefully, he noticed the form of a man etched on it. His head was at the top, and his hands were stretched out on a crosspiece. Yuki had never seen anything like this before, and delighted with his find, he ran to show Grandfather. Carefully, Grandfather took the artifact over and over in the light, examining each detail. The man's eyes grew misty as he reverently ran his fingers over the figure carved on the face of it. Grandfather sat silently, deep in thought. Yuki knew if he waited patiently, he would receive an explanation. That night, as they sat around the campfire, Grandfather began to tell another story. Many generations ago, my grandfather told me about the Creator God that our people worshipped. He said he remembered that when he was a boy like Yuki, his grandfather told him a legend of our people about a great flood that covered the earth. When the flood was over, the Creator God sent all the people to different parts of the land. Our people came to this land so we wouldn't be tempted by evil people. It seemed like a curse for our ancestors to come to this land, but the great Creator God didn't forget us. Yuki waited to hear the rest of the story as Grandfather bent over and tossed a few sticks of driftwood on the dying embers of the fire. As the fire flared up, the boy looked into the sober face of Grandfather as he continued his story. The Creator God loved our people so much, he sent a messenger to tell us about his Son. The messenger told us that evil men had put the Son to death on a cross, like you found, Yuki. But the Creator God was so powerful that he brought him back to life. My grandfather said that at one time all the people believed that the Creator God was the one who had brought them to this land, and they all worshipped him. We lived and prospered because we believed and followed his ways. But somehow the beliefs of our ancestors began to change. They started to put their trust in men who seemed to have magical powers, the ones we call shamans. Soon these men ruled the villages, and all the people began to believe in their spirits. Grandfather paused for a moment, and Yuki and his family waited for him to continue. Yuki, the artifact you found today is proof that our ancestors believed in the Creator God. Perhaps the Campbells were sent by the Creator God to again show us what he is like. How do you know, Grandfather? Yuki questioned. The people in the village don't think so. They believe the Campbells are like the whalers who came long ago. Grandfather studied the fire's embers carefully before he spoke. No, they are different, he said quietly. You can tell, you can only tell by their lives. You must wait and see. Time will tell the story of the inner spirit of a man or woman. The boy's grandfather sat staring into the fire, not saying any more. Yuki crawled into his robe and drifted off into a troubled sleep.